How we doing? We're fit in here.
I may have to eat back here. How are you? I wore the shirt just to
It's a great story, and then you have what's his name? You've got a narrator. Yes, voice over, very creative. I'm saying, is it Jonathan?
Okay, I've got it set up. I have the audio working. Fire when ready now. When you can get this motley crowd quiet.
Yes.
There we go.
2 weeks ago.
That's what I was looking for.
Yes.
Oh, good.
I would read something again.
I'll give you some wine.
That guy. That's sort of that guy.
Grab some water when you wake up, then go do this. Same thing,
They were
about an hour before you go, half an hour.
Well, welcome to the college of complex. This thing working best in one good time. Listen now. Welcome to the college of complexes. Can you everybody hear me? I don't know. All right. Are we on, John? All right. Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 368th meeting since we started in February of 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view that be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give our speaker an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter. We listen to only one fool at a time, one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers from the audience of the speaker, not speeches, questions and answers. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in the audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements they want to make? Now's the time to do it. Any announcements? You got any dog to sell or anything? No, you're
Dog found a home.
All right. No announcements, huh? All right. No announcements? Okay. Next week, it's on your itinerary there. It's how quality of food and environment directly impacts our health and well-being. The write-up of that is on page 2 and 3. That's why you got 3 pages, because it's on there. Anyway, that's our speech for next week. And July 8th, July 1st, trying to think, Kelvin, he's sitting right there. He's our speaker, and he'll be our speaker on July 1st. I'm not sure what he's going to talk about yet, but he's going to give me something on Monday, so that'll be good. July 8th, we have a representation and leadership. Ken Sauter, he's sitting right here. He'll be our speaker, and it should be good. So it's on the itinerary there. Read it. I'm not going to read all this to you. And July 15th, Unlocking the Mysteries of Chinese Characters. That's Jian Lin, she's our PhD, she'll be here. And July 29th, How Families Can Suffer Fewer Losses as a Result of Heart Disease, so that should be good too. Anyway, we have a good itinerary lineup, and that's what it is. But our speaker tonight is Rob Olson. He's a senior research analyst. He's going to talk about the world in 2037, ethical conundrums, challenges, and issues. He's with International Risk Management Institute and an adjunct professor at Cox School of Business, SMU. He'll discuss the critical challenges and issues we will face as technology attains a growing importance in our society, particularly in the area of genetics, artificial intelligence, robotics, and nanotechnology. He contends that even though this exponential growth is in technology may open up a Pandora's box of problems, His view is that the pros outweigh the cons. Rob will argue for the safe and judicious use of technology in virtually all its forms to improve our society and to tackle our most vexing challenges. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Rob Olson.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks so much to the College of Complexes for inviting me. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about some issues that I really got interested in about 7 years ago. My job is to teach, is to research and write about risk management it's a real broad topic. It transcends insurance. I've always been interested in emerging trends in our society, and I've always been interested in technology. I'm no good with technology. I can't fix a computer. But I'm always fascinated with the theoretical aspects of it and what it means to our society and sort of the philosophy of technology in general. And so I read a book, I've told Ken about this, a book called The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. Has anybody read Ray Kurzweil, familiar with Ray Kurzweil? Several of you then, okay, good. Ray Kurzweil is arguably the preeminent futurist in America. Some call him the modern day Thomas Edison. He's done a lot of inventing. He's now with Google or Alphabet. So he wrote a book, The Singularity is Near, and he said that the four main technologies, the four main revolutionary trends that we'll see in the coming decades are artificial intelligence, robotics, genetics, and nanotechnology. And so I read this book, and it was just absolutely fascinating, just a fascinating book. And so I started reading all these other books that I could get my hands on those issues. And so anyway, this is what I want to cover tonight. We want to talk about the exponential growth of computer hardware and software, review the technology trends in genetics, nanotechnology, robotics, and artificial intelligence. Apply these to some vital industries that impact our country, and then look at the ethical and implications and the challenges of these trends. So I begin this, it's like, okay, it's really kind of like dangerous to get involved in prognostication. And a lot of prognosticators, a lot of people who have made predictions about the future have been dead wrong. Yogi Berra said it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. The telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. The device is inherently of no value to us. Western Union Internal Memo, 1876. Heavier than air flying machines are impossible, per the Royal Society in 1895. That was about 10 years before the Wright brothers.
Yeah.
Everything that can be invented has been invented. This was in 1899. Who the hell wants to hear actors talk? Warner Brothers. I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. Thomas Watson, chairman of IBM in 1943. More about Thomas Watson in a little bit. Who is this gentleman? Yes, Leonardo da Vinci. Arguably the first futurist and an amazing, amazing artist, scientist, futurist. These are some of his drawings. If you're ever interested in some of the drawings, now he did these around the time Columbus sailed the ocean blue in the 1490s. And so he did illustrations of parachutes, hang gliders, submarines, automobiles, an early version of automobile, even robots. He was one of the first that came up with the idea of a mechanical device that had human characteristics. And any Back to the Future fans in here?
Oh,
Sure? Ken, you like Back to the Future, don't you? You watched a couple. So here's some predictions that I was looking at that came about in that movie that they prognosticated upon. Video glass, check, that's there. Biometric screening, check, that's there. I was in India a few weeks ago, and amazing, they took photos, they wanted to get a good look at my irises. That's in place now in Tel Aviv airport, and so we're moving more and more toward biometric screening. In 10 or 20 years, I expect that when we go to get on an airplane, we look at a camera and it looks at our irises and it says, go ahead, Mr. Beasley, you can get on board. Smart clothing, large flat screen TVs, hoverboards not here yet, computer tablets, hand-free gaming, flying cars. Okay, so guess how many companies in the world are working on flying cars?
100?
Very good guess, about 70. 70 companies, and of course Google is, Alphabet, Google is of course. Google and Amazon will rule the world in 20 years. Some technology quotes that I think are a lot of fun. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Technology is anything invented after you were born. So this talk tonight is really predicated on the law of accelerating returns and exponential growth in computer technology. So a linear approach, 30 steps takes you to the number 30, of course. What about on an exponential basis? If you 30 steps, anyone want to take? I want to hazard a guess as to what number it takes you to have a doubling of numbers.
Way 100.
Anyone want to take a guess?
Oh, when you double 1, 2, 4.
1, 2,
And how
4,
many times?
30. 1 billion. So this is a chart on the CPU speed in the last 20, 30 years. So this is predicated on Moore's law. Many of you have heard of Moore's law, which says that over the history of computer hardware, the number of transistors of integrated circuits doubles about every 18 to 24 months. So there are computers now that on my thumbnail, a chip the size of my thumbnail, you can get about 500 million transistors. Okay, and a transistor is just an on and off switch, just like a gate. Okay, it's on or off, and that's what computers are predicated. Computer hardware, software is predicated. Binary, exactly. So what I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to talk about these 4 overlapping revolutions. And the more I read about this, the more transfixed and fascinated I get with these topics. Genetics, nanotechnology, robotics, and artificial intelligence. All right, genetics. So obviously we all know about genetics, the branch of human biology that deals with heredity, the scientific study of how genes can control plants and animals. And the more I read about this, the more I read that the old argument, nature versus nurture, is the wrong question. Because our genetics and our environment are constantly interacting with each other, beginning in the womb, beginning at conception. And so it's not just a question of, okay, what drives us as human beings, our behavior? Is it our environment? Is it our genetics? Well, the answer is both. So the Human Genome Project, largest collaborative biological project in the history of man, or man and woman, $3 billion project. And so basically mapping the human genome, mapping the DNA in the human body. It started out very, very slow because of, in 1990, because the computers were slower. In fact, within 2 years, they had only gotten through like 1% of it or so, three years or so. And at that rate, it was going to take about 400 or 500 years to complete it. But what made the difference is the rapidly exponential growth of computer hardware and huge improvements in computer software as well. So the cost of DNA sequencing is plummeting, and this will result in personalized medicine. We'll talk about more of that in just a minute. So one of the fascinating areas to me, one of my cousins is a cancer researcher. And she says that cancer is not just one disease. Well, first off, how many types of cancer are there? Does anybody want to take a guess?
300?
There's about 130. And of course, your guess, madam, may be very good because maybe it depends on how you categorize that. But most oncologists say there's around 120, 130 types of cancer. And a cancer is really a combination of diseases, and it's a disease dealing with defects in our DNA and unsafe wrong mutations within our genome, our body. And so my brothers, anybody known a family member, a friend, or experienced yourself chemotherapy? Okay, so several of you have. Well, my brother went through this. I was telling Ken all about this a while back. Ken and I go way back, Dallas Philosopher's Forum. And my brother went through this, and he said, this was so horrendous. He said, if the cancer comes back, I ain't doing it again. It's just too horrendous. And so what happens with chemo and radiation is that, particularly with chemo, it kills cancer cells slightly better than healthy cells. Okay, that's kind of scary, isn't it? A heck of a lot of collateral damage. So with the Human Genome Project, with gene editing, with nanotechnology, we'll utilize certain molecules to serve as sort of like scissors and edit our genes. We'll have in 20 years or so, each of us will have, hopefully we're all alive in 20 years, each of us will have our human genome mapped. Okay? It may be look like on a credit card, but more likely it might be embedded in a chip under our skin. And this chip will have all the surgeries we've had, what we're allergic to, our overall health, and any operations that we might have had. And it can be updated, be wireless, and it'll be connected to the internet, and it will be constantly, like I say, constantly updated. And so if you're in a horrible accident, then all that medical information about you, I suspect in 10 or 20 years, maybe longer, will be available, okay? And so the idea, though, is we have to outsmart the cancer. We have to outmaneuver, rather than bombarding it with bombs, with nuclear bombs, we have to outsmart it, and technology will help us do so. Nanotechnology, the role of the infinitely small is infinitely large. So this is a study of manipulating matter on an atomic and molecular scale. And it's really just like, isn't it fascinating to try and understand how big, the stars are in our universe? It's equally fascinating, in my opinion, to get down to the really, really small level. So nanotechnology deals with manipulating matter on an atomic level or a molecular level. And so a nanometer is 1 billionth of a meter. Okay? A micrometer is 1 millionth of a meter. So anyway, let's talk about a thimble for a second to give you an idea. We all know what a thimble is, and there's probably some good seamstresses in the room. What's the masculine for seamstress? I don't even know. Is that the same thing? Seamstress could be a man or a woman, right? Okay, well, I'll show you how ignorant I am. So imagine that all 7.4 billion people on this planet were miraculously able to gather around that thimble, okay? And they were all putting a hydrogen atom in that thimble every second, okay? This is a little bit smaller than nanometers. Hydrogen atoms is the simplest and smallest atom out there. How long? 7.4 billion hydrogen atoms within that thimble. How long does it take to fill up the thimble?
1,000 years.
That's a good guess. Anybody else? About 50 years. About 50 years. So a nanometer is to a meter as a marble is to our beautiful blue planet. Okay? There's over 1,000 manufacturer-identified nanoproducts. And so now some of you ladies will have, may have some nanomaterials on your makeup. sunscreen, surface coatings. Some jet engine parts and varnish have nano applied coatings. We talked about this a second ago. One other thing about nano I want to mention is that there's a lot of, I mean, I'm not 100% pro technology in every single way. There's a lot of nuances here. Some research indicates that manufacturing workers who work in nanotechnology, and there's nanotechnology operations in all 50 states with California leading the way, that these workers could be endangered. Now, they've done research on rats, and rats exposed to carbon nanotubes have developed breathing problems and heart problems similar to problems they develop when they're exposed to asbestos. What's fascinating about this to me is that if you expose those rats to, not to carbon nanotubes, but carbon microtubes, now we're talking about 1/1,000,000th of a meter rather than 1 billion, there are no deleterious signs for those rats. So scale is extremely important, and yet there's not much regulation that's going on here. Scale really matters. Just think about something. I mean, one of the most important laws to human beings, physical laws, is gravity, right? It's very important for us. But it's not so important for a mosquito, okay? So that's one of the issues, that's one of the concerns I have with some of these technologies. Who's regulating it? Robotics. So this is a branch of technology, we're all familiar with robotics. It deals with the design, construction of what we hope are intelligent, some type of intelligent machines in some way, and applying artificial intelligence to those machines and machine learning to those robots as well. And so the idea is for them to have strong control, sensory feedback, maybe even computer vision. And they take the place of humans in dangerous environments or manufacturing processes. They're used more and more in dangerous, dull, and what's the other D word? Dangerous, dull, and dirty working conditions. But the problem with robots is they lack in the area, they lack strong artificial intelligence. And what I mean by strong artificial intelligence is the artificial intelligence that we as human beings have, okay? So weak artificial intelligence is the type of intelligence that the world's greatest chess programs have, Deep Blue, okay? They have amazing intelligence in a vanishingly narrow area of expertise. Did y'all hear about the artificial intelligence machine that beat the world's best poker players in January? It's fascinating. Guess who was the favorite in that contest?
Person probably thought.
What?
I would think that they thought the person still the hell.
Yes, exactly. The
Yeah.
human beings, the greatest poker players in the world, it was Texas Hold'em. They were 4-1 favorites. And does anybody know why they were such prohibitive favorites? Yes.
Because they could read their opponents.
Yes, exactly. And they could bluff, right? And does the computer know how to bluff? Not so much, probably. And the computer has imperfect knowledge. The computer has perfect knowledge on a chessboard, right? It knows all the rules and sees the position of all the knights and rooks and pawns and all that, right? Checkers, the same thing. But what was amazing is that artificial intelligence robot, it beat those 4 great poker players.
It's better at the probabilities.
Absolutely right. It knew all the probabilities, and it knew what cards had been played. It was aware of all that. It had it all on its system. There's some bright people in this room. Okay, but they lack strong artificial intelligence. They lack intuition, lack creativity, common sense, lack pattern recognition, and can't engage in sparkling conversation at cocktail parties. Okay. So AI is the intelligence of machines and the branch of computer science that aims to create it. Artificial intelligence basically says it tries to look at it, it perceives its environment and takes steps to be successful in its environment. And so what's the impact on symbol analyst jobs in the future? What's the impact on blue collar jobs? It's a fascinating subject. I could spend an hour just talking about that. We could spend a lot of time just on that topic alone. So whenever anyone comes up with a new artificial intelligence program, these experts, and I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence, I'm very interested in it, but you know what the first question people will often ask these developers of the latest algorithms? Can I use it to win in the stock market? That's what everybody wants to know, you know. How can I use this to pick the right stock? And so automated trading algorithms, an algorithm is just a complex software program. So anyway, they're involved in about half the stock market transactions. And so they see a particular trend, and within 1/1000th of a second, they'll switch the buy or sell order. And so it makes it difficult for human day traders. And so the strong artificial intelligence, as I mentioned, is the type of artificial intelligence that we as humans have. We are good at pattern recognition, we have common sense, we are creative, we can size up a unique situation very, very quickly. Robot artificial intelligence, not so much. Okay, the idea is that that's what we want to. That's what some want to create. And so Ray Kurzweil says that strong artificial intelligence is possible by the year 2029. Elon Musk and many others say there's a lot of danger involved in this. That these machines could basically see us and view us as inferior in 20, 30, 40, 100 years. I don't know when that's going to happen, if it does. And so will they eventually treat us the same way we treat gorillas? Okay. I'm not so sure that I buy that argument, but many intelligent and well-versed people are very concerned about that, including Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, Bill Gates has some concern about that. And some of the two founders of Google are very concerned about it as well. Michio Kaku, has anybody read any of his books? He's sort of a futurist and a physicist, an amazing intellect. He says strong AI is an end of the century problem, talking about the 21st century. Okay, so who's this guy? It's not Frankenstein. Frankenstein's monster. Why do I have this slide up here?
You like Boris Karloff?
This is really sort of one of the first really cool examples of artificial intelligence. Frankenstein has created this monster. The monster has intelligence. The monster allegedly has feelings. And so if the monster has feelings, then what does that mean? Didn't Frankenstein's monster want rights?
Yeah.
Right? He also committed murder, exactly. I don't think he intended to, but he did. Okay, so what is this? I mentioned someone's name a minute ago. This is Watson. This is IBM's Watson, and beat the Jeopardy champions in 2011, which shocked a lot of people. Okay, because Jeopardy, unlike chess, is very open-ended, and so Watson learned it scoured millions of pages of all the newspapers and all the encyclopedias and all the geography books and all that. And it learned similes and puns and all that, and it defeated the top Jeopardy champions. Okay. Here's a question that sink it and you are scratched. Anybody have any idea what that might be? What is a what is it, the cue ball? No, not the cue, yeah, cue ball.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
8-ball. Watson's now going to medical school and using big data to diagnose and treat patients. And the idea is that Watson and doctors will be collaborators. Okay. So imagine that anybody been to Big Bend? Okay. Big Bend is just awesome, one of the most beautiful parts of Texas. What's out at Big Bend? Is there much out there as far as civilization?
No.
Do you think there are going to be very many cardiologists out there? What if you have a heart attack at Big Bend and then they take you to Marfa and there's no cardiologist in Marfa? The idea is that that general practitioner, maybe there's a cardiologist in Marfa, or what are some other cities, the towns? They're really towns. It's very, what's that? Yeah, Terlingua. I don't think there's a cardiologist.
That's where the cardiologist is also the medical examiner.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the idea is that that general practitioner, that he or she in the future will be able to tap into Watson, input the information about that person that he or she believes just had a heart attack, their vital signs, their history, their labs, all these different things, and help that general practitioner who's not an expert in cardiology, help him with the diagnosis. And so the idea is that Watson or other types of artificial intelligence programs will be another tool in the toolkit for that doctor, and particularly important. Just think about some of the remote Alaskan villages that are out there, and so the idea is that this could be a really awesome advancement for a lot of remote areas. So we talked about this outmaneuvering cancer. So guess how long, let's say that you have, let's go back to cancer for a minute. How long would it take your oncologist to read all the oncology medical journals? How long per week would it take that oncologist to do all the top flight oncology journals? How long would it take him to read those?
3 hours? 3 hours?
About 40 or 50 hours per week. Okay, there are journals all over the world. 40 or 50, does he have time, he or she have time to do that? No. So the idea is that Watson can help oncologists with these types of complex issues. So here's some questions. Does anybody ever ask Siri, silly questions like, Siri, will you marry me? Or Siri, I love you? Or can I have a date? Or whatever. And so these are some questions that I or others have asked Siri over the years. And Siri's automatic artificial intelligence bot for the iPhone, right? There's another, what's the one for the Android? There's another one. There's 2 or 3 of them out there. They're all female. What is the depth of the Red Sea? Well, Siri knew that right off the bat. Most of us wouldn't know the answer to that question, right? Whereas Elvis buried? Well, Siri, that threw Siri off. Why is that? Because Siri said, they don't recognize a person, the first name of Elvis and last name buried. They didn't recognize that person. We all know we're talking about Elvis Costello, right? No, it didn't recognize that, it thought that buried was the last name of this person named Elvis, so it didn't help me on that. Can a crocodile play basketball? It sent me to a website of a girls' junior high basketball team in Florida. Would a 5-year-old know the answer to this question?
Yeah.
Yeah, a 5-year-old would know that's a silly question. A crocodile cannot play basketball. Siri didn't know. Siri didn't know that. Okay, so Siri was wrong. In one study, Siri was wrong 33% of the time. Okay, so AI and Doomsday. What's this movie? What's this from this movie? Dr. Strangelove, or How I Started to Love the Bomb. Oh, I saw it again. This is a jewel. This is a jewel. Have you not seen this? You got to see it. So with IA, what could go wrong? An evil race of robot overlords, machine learning and evolutionary programming. What we mean by machine learning evolutionary programming is that you create this program and you build within the program the fact that look for ways, Mr. Program, look for ways to improve. Look for ways to improve this. And that program, that software evolves to improve. The software that beat the poker players had evolutionary program within it. It had machine learning, and each day it did better and better because it learned the characteristics of its opponents. Okay? It had all the calculations and all the odds, but it learned about its opponents. So, back to Frankenstein, I can think on my own, I should have rights. And so, can we stop this? And that's really not the focus of my presentation, but it's a serious concern for a lot of people that this software will get more and more powerful and eventually see that it is superior in intelligence to human beings. Like I say, I'm not 100% behind that theory. Here's a nice Woody Allen quote. More than any other time in history, mankind faces a crossroads. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness, the other to total extinction. Let us pray we have the wisdom to choose correctly. Whoa. Okay, so now let's apply these. I got about half an hour. Applies to medicine and healthcare, transportation, manufacturing, and housing. So the idea with this, as I mentioned, is that in maybe 10 or 20 years, we're going to have our own DNA mapped. Okay? Now, one of the issues, the medical issues I've dealt with over the years is depression, and I had to go at fourth medication. It finally was the right one, but I had bad reactions to the first three that I tried, and so in the future, if the doctors, if they know my DNA, they're going to know, okay, well, I think Rob's going to have a bad reaction to this based on his DNA. This is not going to get a good antidepressant for him. This next one's not a good one, but this is a good one, okay? And so the idea is to reduce a lot of trial and error medication to find that right antidepressant or to find that right high blood pressure medication. I've got a friend, he's on 7 different high blood pressure medications, and they still can't. He's had a mini stroke, and they still can't get it down. Okay, with a mapping of his DNA, the idea is that they're going to be able to juxtapose his DNA and analyze the different types of medications and find the one that works for him without all the incredible trial and error. It's called personalized medicine. So nanorobotics, robots, we mentioned how in the future perhaps you can use nanobots that are a few nanometers wide that can send medicine to the exact area where that cancer is without all the collateral damage. Cell therapies, robotic techniques, artificial intelligence, neuroprosthetics. So I have another friend who has Parkinson's. Does anybody know anybody with Parkinson's at all? Several of us. And he tried all sorts of medications, nothing worked, so they finally implanted a brain pacemaker, and adjacent to his brain, they drilled a hole in his head and put that brain pacemaker in there, and he's had phenomenal. He can start driving again. He's doing great. He's doing great, and over 10,000 people in the world have this. So it's a pacemaker for the brain. So my friend, Jack, he is a combination of biological and non-biological intelligence, and he is very thankful for that. And so these neuroprosthetics can be used for depression, can be used for ADHD, can be used for a host of neurological problems. So the idea is with medicine in the future, it could be predictive, personalized, preventive, and participatory, where that person knows their DNA and they can participate more fully with greater knowledge. They can participate more fully in all their healthcare decisions. Dr. Algorithm. So what are some of the ethical issues? Technology causes costs of healthcare to rise more rapidly. Longevity issues, the end of care, end of life issues. As our technology improves, we can extend someone's life further and further and further, but in many cases, the quality of their life deteriorates to such a point that, it's like it's not worth it. Quality of life is so horrendously poor. And so then that's a very complex societal issue. And it will probably get bigger and bigger in the future because of this technology, the ability of this. So ethical and economic implications of boosting lifespan. So if you have, just think about Social Security, pension plans and things like that, of people living longer and longer and longer, then that can have amazing, severe ramifications for our financial systems, for example. Genetic testing, there's privacy issues there as well. So what about amped humans? Okay, so now you can do some of these brain implants that will help someone. There's making progress helping someone that has severe ADHD. And what if that helps that child to the point where that child now is a super intellect and wins one spelling bee after another, and is the smartest in the class, and they have been quote unquote amped, okay? Well, if more kids get that, even though they might not have any medical problems, then what happens in 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years, and your child is the only one that's not amped, and your child is at the bottom of the class. Everyone else has got all these brain enhancements, huge issues. Probably won't be in our lifetime, but our children, our grandchildren's lifetime, very likely. And so, the law of unintended consequences is something I always talk to my students about, because our human brains, they're the product of millions, hundreds of thousands, or millions of years of evolution. And so we start tinkering with this type of thing. What are the unintended consequences of that? They could be quite severe. So that's a concern, that we're a combination. We have this biological-based intelligence, but if we start interfering in all that, we don't know what type of Pandora's box that could open. Other issues, more catastrophic cases. It used to be that a 1-pound baby could not survive 20 years ago. 1-pound baby is about fitted into the palm of my hand, and now we're able to save 1-pound babies. Now those babies that cost society, it's a great thing that we can save them, but it's very, very expensive. And that baby's health problems not only occur in the first few years of his or her life, but it can extend to the whole life with all the respiratory issues that can come with that. Over-treatment and over-diagnosis. I talk to my students a lot because I teach a health insurance class at SMU and at UNT. And as this technology improves, these CAT scans, these MRIs, they can detect more and more quote-unquote abnormalities, but many of these abnormalities are false positives. And so as the technology improves, the chances of over-diagnosis, the chances of over-treatment becomes huge. And my cousin is a radiologist, and he talks about how they're using artificial intelligence some, and he talks about how it just generates a huge amount of false positives. Transportation. So this is a real fascinating field to think about autonomous cars, intelligent highways and roads. A good example of an intelligent infrastructure. Remember the horrible bridge collapse in Minnesota a few years ago? Several people were killed, right? I don't know how many were killed, a lot. A dozen maybe. Well, now the replacement bridge is a smart bridge. It has all sorts of sensors embedded within the bridge. Okay? And these sensors will reveal things like rust, cracks, stress, exactly, that's the word I was looking for. Stress on that bridge, okay? Crumbling certain aspects of it. And it will convey this information wirelessly to the Minnesota Department of Transportation or wherever it goes. And so they're monitoring this bridge. So it's an intelligent bridge. And the idea is that our infrastructure needs to be, this has been a big political issue as well, it needs to be updated, and part of that will be updated with smart technologies. and with sensors on. It's called the Internet of Things. Most of you have heard of the Internet of Things. So highways of the future, highways in 20 or 30 or 40 years will be interacting with our smart cars, and so it's a vehicle to infrastructure integration. Drones is a big deal. It's going to be used more and more on construction of freeways, and involved in the insurance business. A lot of adjusters get injured or even die every year getting up and down on roofs to check for damage. And so drones will be used more and more. Drones were used in the nuclear reaction at Fukushima Daiichi with marginal success. There were a lot of problems. Driverless automobiles and trucks, and way down the road, flying cars. Anybody want to take a guess at how many companies in the world are working on flying cars? Good guess, 120 or so, 130. So in my field, risk management, we're seeing reduction in cars with automated technologies, reduction in losses. The question is, who's going to be liable? Okay, is it the person that bought the car that forgot to do all the updates? Because updates to cars now will be just like our updates for computers down the road. You won't take your car into the the auto dealer. 20 or 30 years, you will just see that it's time for your update, and it's all going to be software, or most of it. I mean, there are some exceptions with tires and things like that. But
I'm not loading Windows 10.
yeah, that's right. What type of software you have. But the idea is, and my boss, he has a Tesla. It's a $120,000 car. He's the owner of a company, or the CEO, and he gets all of his updates, and it constantly adds new autonomous features to that car. And so the question is, what if the car has an accident? Is Volvo going to be liable, or is the software companies that Volvo hired to create the algorithms going to be responsible? Will it be some type of no fault? Will it be product liability? We don't know yet. And that's the fascinating thing about all this, is that the technology is racing ahead so fast. And the insurance implications, the legal implications, all these other factors, the socioeconomic implications, are racing to keep up with it. So, how is all this going to get played out? My mom is 87, and she can't drive anymore. She would love to have an autonomous car. But the way it is now, autonomous cars don't do so well when it's raining or snowing. They don't do well with big canopies of trees overhead. They don't do well in construction zones. They don't do real well on very, very windy days. They sort of don't know what to do when a plastic bag from Walmart's is flying around in the air. It sort of doesn't know what to do with that. It doesn't know what, the autonomous cars are not very good at four-way stop signs, because what does everybody do when they're at a four-way stop sign?
Negotiate.
They negotiate, and they kind of edge forward a little bit and edge forward, and when the Google car senses that, it's paralyzed. It doesn't know what the hell to do. It's just these human beings are not rational drivers, and we all know that's the case. And so the idea is that they're trying to program the Google car, and Mercedes is doing the same thing. So it's not a perfect driver. It's more like a driver like we are, imperfect. Okay. So I think this is a video, and I'm not thinking it's going to work, but it's a video of a blind guy who's driving the Google car. It's really awesome to see this guy. You can punch it up. He had macular degeneration, and
Is this the blind guy's view?
yeah. Well, yeah, very good. But it's really cool. I mean, it's this is another great thing about technology, is that this blind guy now, on a sunny, beautiful day, he could get around on his own, And it's just awesome to think about that. Manufacturing. So robotics and artificial intelligence, nanotechnology is used in manufacturing. And there's more and more 3D printing that's going to go on. So most of us have a homeowner's policy, or we have some type of personal liability policy, let's say if we rent. And yet we don't have any coverage for products liability because we don't produce anything, right? Unless we have a business or something. But the homeowners of the future will probably need products liability insurance because they will be producing things through 3D printing. You can get a 3D printer at Office Depot for a few $1,000s. I don't think it's that
You
great.
can buy kids for $200.
Is that right?
Yeah, you can buy
$200 a 3D printer?
or less.
Wow, okay, well, I stand corrected. Thank you, Ken. So, you know, who's responsible if the robot causes injury? Intellectual property issues. One of the real fascinating areas about this, and this applies to pilots as well. I got about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes? 10 minutes. Okay, I don't want to get kicked out if I go beyond.
This is about going beyond 2030.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. So the idea is that if that factory has artificial intelligence robotics and there's some type of malware that gets in the system and nothing runs, does anybody remember how to manufacture something? And pilots are the same issues, is that they're losing their fingertip knowledge because it's more and more automated pilot, and the pilot is now turning into an observer in many cases. And how do you learn? Do you learn something better by being an observer or by being a doer? By a doer, right? And so the concern is that with just think about all the cyber events and crashes and what airline went down? British Airways recently. Their whole system went down. So the loss of fingertip knowledge is a huge ethical and philosophical issue, societal issue. And so, you know, what are we going to do if that system goes down? Is that probably going to know how to fly the plane?
Don't outsource to New Delhi.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so nanotechnology, we talked about that. Worker and environmental safety issues versus just turn it loose and just go for it. And if we can manufacture something cheaper with nanotechnology, go for it. And worry about the ramifications later, worry about the environmental issues later, worry about the worker safety issues later, I think that might be a mistake. And nanoparticles, asbestos of the 21st century. So who's this guy? Bill Gates. Soon to be the second richest man on the planet.
Who's first?
I think Bezos is going to overtake him, the CEO of Amazon.
Well, I thought it was Putin.
Yeah, that's a good point. Putin is probably number one.
Powerful.
You don't know who the really rich is.
Yeah.
The secret.
Well, I just know it's not me. Smart homes. So I had a loss in my home a few years ago, $75,000 loss. I had a leak in the crawl space of my home. It's an older home. The home got very, very humid. We couldn't figure out what was wrong, and the floors started warping. It was like, what in the world was going on? There's something wrong with the floors. Called the plumber in, and the condensation and all the water had basically ruined all the flooring. We had to move it out of the entire house. We were out of the house for 5 months. It was about a $75,000, $80,000 loss. Homes of the future will be smart homes. They will have sensors embedded throughout them. That's going to be a huge savings for insurance companies, and ultimately a reduction in our premium. Homes with robots. Guess who is working on robots harder than anybody else? What country?
Amazon? Oh.
What country? Japanese. They call them robotics, domestic robots. Why are they working so hard on them? They have the lowest, aging population. They have the lowest birth rate in the world, 1.2 children per couple. So they either need to start having more sex, or they need to bring in more immigrants. But anyway, there's a big concern that they're not going to have the resources to care for the elderly, and so they're working very, very diligently on domestic robots. I had a friend of mine His mother's an RN. She was moving an obese patient at the hospital 4 or 5 years ago. A horrible back injury she got, herniated disc. She is still on workers' comp, medical disability. Hospitals of the future will have robots that can help move those patients. Not here yet, though. Homes with monitoring devices, sensors, RFID tags for personal property. They are working now on ground sensors for areas of California that are prone to mudslides. And so you can have lives saved when those sensors detect that mudslide is about to occur, or earthquakes. And the idea is to utilize technology to save lives, and to save property. Okay, so what are some of the ethical implications? Libel via the internet is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. Problems with big data. The problem with big data in the research that I've done is that big data is so big, it's high velocity, high volume, and high variability, that many times big data is seen as a god, and it's over-relied upon. Big data is also based on information from the past, and our world is changing so rapidly that information may not be applicable. Another issue is that the amount of the data is so gigantic that in many cases heuristics or rules of thumb work better on big data. And so, it's just, I think Mark Twain talked about the 3 kinds of lies. There were lies, and there were damned lies, and statistics. And accountants talk about how I can torture the numbers any way you want me to torture them, Mr. Enron. And I see it in the business world where you can manipulate this data in so many different ways. And so are we over-reliant on big data? And that's one of the philosophical issues, one of the fascinating issues. Desktop publishing, more and more 3D printing of illegal drugs. Drugs getting easier and easier to obtain. And dangers concerning robots. There was a German worker that was killed by a robot last year. There's been over 30 workers killed by robots. And the idea is to create collaborative robots that will work with the workers and to be much safer. And right now with the major industrial robots, you have to have complex programming. You have to have IT people that are skilled in writing programs for these robots. And the idea is down the road, we want factory workers to be able to show the robot what to do, and have that robot programmed in such a way that it cannot harm an individual. And the closer someone gets to that robot, the more that robot slows down. So computer ethics deals with this is getting bigger and bigger. It's a fascinating field, in my opinion. What are the moral problems that are created with technology? And how should we make decisions regarding professional and social conduct? Privacy is a big issue. Hacking is a big issue. I told Tom, my position is that overall I think technology, it has more benefits for our society than more drawbacks. But I can certainly see the other perspective on that. And so the digital divide. Some say that the haves and have-nots of the future will be based on their comfort level with technology. I tell my students down the road there may be 2 types of jobs. The jobs in 20 years or 30 years, the jobs where you tell the computer what to do, and the jobs where
The computer tells you.
the computer tells you what to do. And I say, you want the job where you're telling the computer what to do. And so we talked about the automation issue. The pilots say we're forgetting how to fly. Well, that's kind of a dangerous scenario to think about. And then the loss of blue-collar jobs due to the stunning growth in technology. So some say that there's a second industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution is where a lot of machines replaced blue-collar jobs. But now there's a concern that computers, robots, artificial intelligence can replace simple analyst jobs. Let me give you a quick example. My cousin I mentioned is a radiologist, and he says now that there are some amazing computer pattern recognition software programs out there that are starting to do radiologist jobs. It's still in its infancy, it's still there, it's still in its infancy, but he can see where some of this is going to India. The average radiologist in the United States makes about $300,000 a year. The average radiologist in India, anyone want to take a guess what they make? 30,000, about 10%. And so some of these are going over there. My cousin says they do pretty good work. But a big part of his job still is interacting with the primary care physician, interacting with cardiologist, interacting with the patient. He does a lot of that, and so obviously a computer can't do that. But when you think about automating a radiologist job, and then think about the automation of a maid in a house. Now there are robotic vacuum cleaners, but how are you going to program a maid to clean up clutter in a house? Just think about all the different clutter in a house, very unstructured. And is that how are you going to program all the different types of there's millions of different types of clutter, right? How are you going to program that maid, that robot to do that? And I don't think we're going to see that in the next 100 years. Or an auto mechanic. How are you going to get a computer? I mean, just think about the skill level of that auto mechanic, something I don't have, and then each of the different types of cars and the different parts and all the diagnostics. Now, artificial intelligence can be used on the diagnostic piece, but anyway, how about simple analyst jobs? How will those be impacted? And so this is an interesting chart which shows the capabilities of human workers, and the computer technology. Is this trend going to exceed this figure here? And if that's the case, then we're maybe talking about the singularity when we're losing more and more and more jobs. I frankly don't see that occurring in the next 50, 60, 70 years, but I could be wrong. And then lastly is computationalism. This is a fascinating thought. Is that the mind nothing more than a computer program? And what's the difference between our brain and the most wildly powerful computer that we can imagine? In my mind, what's the distinction is that we are an amazing combination of RNA, DNA, various proteins. We are analog and digital. We have so many different states. We have billions and billions of different types of enzymes and neurons. And we have developed over the course of hundreds of thousands or millions of years of evolution. And so for someone to say, well, I can make a computer that will replicate that, I think that is hubris. I just don't buy it. I could be wrong. Ray Kurzweil thinks that it's going to happen. And so that involves reverse engineering the brain and trying to, it's like they don't have our creativity, they don't have our common sense, they don't have pattern recognition. Well, the scientists can't agree on what we mean. What is creativity? They can't agree on what creativity means, or what consciousness means, or what common sense means. So if you can't agree on what that means, then how are you going to reverse engineer the brain, and how are you going to develop that in a computer program? So the world's going to be shaped by 4 dynamic technologies, forces in the next 20 years: genetics, nanotechnology, robotics, and artificial intelligence. And I hope that we will deal with this in a common sense, plausible, contemplative way, where we look at the pros and cons and we don't move too forward in this realm. A couple of quotes that I like: "The future is clear to me. What I don't understand is the present," by Gerhard Koscher, and Albert Einstein. "I never think of the future, it comes soon enough." Thank you for your attention. Questions?
Yeah, so wait,
Oh, okay.
get the PA system to work. Where'd you hide him, did you?
Okay, I sit down now?
No, you're staying there.
I don't know the rules.
Oh, you get to answer questions now.
Yeah, do you think there'll be enough people to repair all these robots when they go wrong?
To repair them?
Yep.
Will there be enough people to repair all this stuff?
Oh, that'll be automated.
Yeah, perhaps that's going to be automated as well, John. The thing is that I don't see that as being an issue. I could be wrong on that, but I think that you're getting more and more IT people that are out there. That's where what the money is. That's where the jobs are. And I think as those are developed, that there will be people there that will be able to repair them. But the one thought is that if those machines have machine learning and utilize evolutionary programming, then in many cases, as this lady mentioned, they could be repairing themselves. So, but I don't see there a shortage of workers to repair them. I don't see that.
Yeah, but you see, right now, you know, in a home, you've got so many gadgets, you'll be
Yeah.
repairing one
Yeah.
thing every week. Now, you know, there are some things that just, you know, the thing is, as you know with risk, you just can't predict
Right.
these things.
That's right.
So, you know, for example, these days, these Chinese parts are the doom of air conditioning. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
you know, and I personally just repair a unit every
Yep.
month of this stuff. So
Right.
that's it. The other question I have is, who will own the robots?
Right, and that's one of the big questions is who owns the data, who's going to own those robots, and initially the companies that build those robots will say, okay, we own the intellectual property to them, but the person that buys the robot will own the robot. Okay, so the industrial companies that purchase these industrial robotics, in some cases they lease them, in some cases they outright buy them, but they own the robot, they own the data, but the analytics and all the algorithms that go into that robot and all the proprietary information is owned by the robotic manufacturer.
So what will we do? What will we do with this increasingly surplus population then?
That's an excellent question, because if you have a bigger and bigger population in robotics and artificial intelligence takes over more and more jobs, then you know what's going to happen to all the workers. And if you extend that concept, I love that question, if you extend that concept so that you have fewer and fewer workers, then if they don't have money coming in from their jobs, where's the demand going to be for products that the artificial intelligence and the robotics create? Now, the neo-Luddites have a real concern about that. I tend to think that when there's new technologies are developed, that it's going to create new jobs. I could be wrong, but the Luddites have been concerned about the Industrial Revolution since the early 19th century. And it hasn't happened yet. I just believe that as this new technology is created, that there's going to be, I mean, just think about all the jobs that are out there that 150 years ago they didn't exist. Okay, actuary didn't exist. A petroleum engineer didn't exist. There was no such thing as an oncologist per se. And so industrial design really didn't exist so much. So, but the neo-Luddites are concerned, and maybe they have a point, that as more and more of these jobs are automated, then there could be a severe unemployment situation. I think the chances of that happening are under 50-50, but.
You know, you analyze trends. What seems to have gone on is we have people working longer and longer hours just to survive. So actually, it's weird because it should have gone the other way, right? But it's not. So the question is, that's a serious problem. Now, Tom advocates a shorter and shorter working week.
Like you have in Europe.
Yeah. So will that happen here, or do we just throw people on the scrap heap? What do you think is going to happen?
I think you're going to see that. I think you're going to eventually see. When I started the insurance business, it was for executives and highly educated workers in the business. It was a 5.5-day work week. We work Saturday mornings. Don't do that anymore. And so I see that trend continuing. Maybe 35 hours will be the standard work week. So I see that trend. I think that you're going to have more and more vacation time in the United States. So I see that trend occurring. But I don't necessarily agree with your statement that people are working longer hours. A lot of the research indicates that that amount of hours they're working is somewhat stable. Maybe some tangential information indicating that with the technology they're maybe working a little bit more, that the blurring of office hours and pleasure time is blurred because of technology.
Okay, in Dan Brown's novel Inferno, there is a geneticist
Right.
who puts out an airborne virus which has the capability of inserting a modification into people's genes
Yeah.
as pandemic. And what it does is it makes 25% of the people, men on the earth, sterile, 25% of the women on the earth sterile, thereby solving the overpopulation problem.
Yeah.
So is that good or evil?
It's a tough crowd. I would argue that that's evil. That's dysgenics in its worst forms. I think that's more science fiction, but who knows whether that could occur.
Even though it's totally democratic in that it doesn't discriminate against anyone.
Right. But I mean, just think about the joy. In most cases, the joy one gets from being a parent, and raising children, and some people are better programmed for doing that than others. And to say that 50% of them that's not going to happen, I find that concept repugnant.
Okay, so if we get to the point where there are 200 ultra-wealthy oligarchs who force us to work as serfs on their corporate plantations, will that be as bad or worse than having robotic overlords?
Man, these are tough questions. I've never gotten some of these questions before. I think both are bad.
Did you answer that?
I don't know where to go with that question.
That sounded like a splunge to me, if you don't mind.
Repeat it again. Let me think about it. Repeat it again. I'll try and tackle it.
What I said was, if we get to the point where there are 100 ultra-wealthy oligarchs who force us all to be serfs on their corporate plantations,
Right.
is that better or worse than being subject to the rule of robotic overlords?
Well, it depends on
The program.
it depends on whether those robotic overlords are good, have good tendencies, or evil tendencies. It's not a black and white question. There's a lot of nuances involved in something like that. If that sparks in my mind a fascinating issue, and that is, can we control these robots so that they are benevolent? Okay, and many say the answer to that is, can we program that in their DNA, quote unquote. But many would say that's not possible, because how are robots being used now in the world?
As slaves.
However, the people.
They're used to a big extent in the military. Okay, the military is using them, and they're using them in drones and other areas. They're using them to kill other people. And so the way I'd answer that question is, if the robotic overlords are overall beneficent and are overall looking at the overall well-being of the populace, then I'd rather be subjugated to the artificial intelligence robotic overlords.
I was wondering if you could make a few distinctions in here, and I'll try to prompt you by asking the question. Is a robot ever able to do anything it wasn't programmed to do?
Well, that's a very good question. That gets back to evolutionary programming. Now, if you look at the standard way programming occurs, it's not going to do anything it wasn't programmed to do. Okay, and if it has bugs in it, there's going to be the law of unintended consequences that's going to apply, and you're going to not be pleased with the result. But with evolutionary programming and with machine learning, the goal there, and it's in its infancy, okay? The goal there is that it will eventually be able to be better and better at and be able to accomplish things that its master, its software developer, hadn't planned, okay? So it depends on how it's programmed. Right now, evolutionary programming and machine learning is, and as I say, it's in its infancy. And for the most part, the answer to your question is no. Right now.
Okay, you covered a lot of ground, and you did bring up a lot of ethical questions, which I think are absolutely critical to this subject. Science has a tendency to say, well, if we can do it, we should just do it, but then you get into some really heavy questions, which you raised on, which is good. Are you aware that the CIA has had a mind control program since the 50s called Monarch or MK Ultra, where they are literally programming people to do things? And along with that, the military has had a super soldier program where they are programming soldiers to be literally superhuman. And getting them to the point where they can't be killed.
I've not read that. Where did you read about that, Ken?
It's out there. You can look up MK Ultra or Monarch, and you'll find quite a bit of material. You can look up super soldiers, you'll find quite a bit of material. But that's another aspect of this
I've
whole
not read that.
subject that gets into literally messing with people's minds.
So they're like, is the allegation somehow that there are neurological implants,
No,
hardware?
it's not just neurological implants. It's also involving hypnotism. It's involving torture, splitting personalities with torture to create different personalities that can be called out at different times. There's a whole lot of stuff involved with it.
I've not
But
read
it
that.
goes right along with this subject, and it raises a whole lot of
Sure, absolutely.
Given the fact that historically industry has been built on, well, it's evolved to being built completely on capitalism, which is greed in its essence, that they will build machines like they do today to wear out, so that you will have to have them repaired or you will have to buy new ones. Otherwise, they wouldn't earn nearly as much money. Do you think that they're going to make robots that might be, say, flying airplanes or driving cars that would not be susceptible to suddenly going out of whack?
I think it's possible. In many ways, what you say is correct, but there are exceptions. I mean, I think the automobiles of today last a lot longer than they used to. I think you can have automobile engines that go 200, 300,000 miles. You didn't see that back in the 60s. So you're talking about planned obsolescence and planned deterioration. I don't necessarily see that type of planned obsolescence occurring. There could be exceptions to that. But the issue really is that with Moore's law, the computers, the programming, the speeds get so fast, so quickly, that you basically have that now with a lot of computers. Your computers can be out of date in 4 or 5 years. But I think the idea is that if you make computers as dependable as possible, and then people would become more and more widespread. If you make flying cars as dependable as possible, the lawsuits are down, and the reliability is up, you're going to create a big demand for that, which will drive the capital markets toward that. So I think that always the goal is to make it, in most cases, to make it high quality so that will help the brand as well. But on the counter side of that most excellent question is that as computer technology gets more and more complex, that means that more can go wrong. And that's been a real issue with computers and other technology that has more and more facets to it, more and more features. It's got to be properly integrated. The coding gets more complicated. When you make changes to the codes, you have to make sure it's properly integrated. And so with the more complex products, more can go wrong. And so that's sort of the flip side. But I believe that with evolutionary programming, I believe that down the road that the reliability of a lot of these products is going to be pretty good.
This isn't so much future. London and a lot of European countries and major cities are all photographed with recognition software.
Yes, yes.
This, the most recent terrorism, they could
Yeah.
not, there's so much data
Yeah,
that goes to a centralized place. It takes them sometimes 24 hours, even maybe a little, and then all of a sudden you see all these arrests pop up all
right,
over,
right, right, right.
And Washington DC is one of the most photographed,
Yes.
grown.
London too, London's a big one, yeah.
Right, and there's still that lull.
Right. Well, and the data is just, there's so much material. There's so much data, there's so many photographs, and how are you going to make sense of that? And so it goes back to big data and the weaknesses of big data. But in many cases, that type of big data and all those photographs have helped capture the criminals. And so that's a good thing.
Right, and then you have police officers, trained people, military. They know what someone, that innate feeling of what something isn't right and normal.
Right, right.
And what they're seeing. That doesn't always translate well into a computer.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, so that goes into common sense and creativity and, think about how complex we are and how, all the psychology of our emotions and thoughts and feelings and beliefs and all that. And that plays into who we are. And how are you going to program those kinds of things? So that's,
And then this is just my public statement. I don't care if they scan my retina, if it would stop an act of terrorism,
yep,
like at the London airport,
yep, yep.
I'm fine with it.
Me too, me too.
I'm okay with that. And, the civil liberties and all that, when you lose someone or you see a child blown up,
Yep.
I think it's off the table for me.
Yep. Very good. Oh, this is great. I'm not used to getting all these questions. It's fantastic.
I'm just curious, who do you think is responsible for the final decision for an artificial intelligence controlled robotic warrior or drone that makes a killing decision on its own, of its own will, so to speak, using the evolutionary program to figure things out?
Right.
The bottom line, who's responsible for the killing decision if, let's say, the artificial intelligence evolves to the point where it decides who and what it's going to kill regardless of its programming, then who really is making that decision?
Right.
And the other thing is, I just read on my smartphone that the FCC is releasing a 5G rollout in major cities, including Dallas, for the ultra millimeter short-wave wavelength to bring in the Internet of Things, which is extremely harmful to the eyes and the brain and the heart, even possibly causing brain cancer and heart cancer, which they're getting ready to roll out in the city for the Internet of Things, where everything is identified by an RFID chip.
Yep.
And probably eventually we'll have our own chip also. What do you think about that?
Own IP address. Yeah. On the military question, I think that is a question for the top echelon of the Pentagon and even the president. The scary thing about that is, what could go wrong, and is the programming perfect? But I think what's interesting is that in the past, a PhD in philosophy could get a job at a university, could get a job at maybe a major think tank. But now, the military, major corporations, and others are hiring PhDs in philosophy. They're hiring ethicists to address those kinds of questions. And they're fascinating questions, and one has to look at all the pros and cons of something like that. Who will benefit from that? Who will be harmed? What are the chances of something going wrong? And the law of unintended consequences. And so, I think ultimately a decision like that has to be at the highest levels, of the highest echelons of like the Pentagon, and that even before that is all the programming issues that inculcate that. they'll have to be reviewed very, very carefully. So I think it's highly complex, and there's no set answer to that. But I think that that type of decision would be at the highest echelons, and that political scientists and psychologists and ethicists and philosophers and that all the disciplines, biologists, that all the disciplines have to look at an issue like that.
Yeah, would you agree that the major problem really is testing? Because
Yes.
there are literally, when you have complex code and the branches, you get into trillions of permutations.
Yes.
And then, as Ains would say, it's always the completely unexpected thing
Yes.
that crops up. I mean,
Right.
for example, all these wonderful mathematicians that were announced back before 2008 that, we can gamble and, because we've got an algorithm to predict risk and everything else. They were totally wrong.
Right.
And the financial system
That's
blew
right.
up.
That's right. A lot of the models in the risk management industry that try to predict earthquakes, that try to predict hurricanes, that try to predict what the stock market's going to do, so often that they're wrong. And there's imperfect knowledge. And I mean, just when you think about the factors that drive whether a hurricane occurs, or think of all the factors involved in whether the stock market's going to go up or not, psychological factors, economic data, financial data, you name it. And so the permutations, it's just like, 50 moves into a chess game. Just imagine all those permutations. But the idea is with big data and analytics that we'll get better at those kinds of things. For example, we are a little bit better at forecasting the weather now than we used to be. We are better in certain types of dealing with certain types of economic problems. Example would be the micro lending. I was in India a few weeks ago, and more micro lending, and the poverty in India has reduced due to that and other things by probably 30% since 10, 15 years ago. So a lot of societal problems are improving thanks to technology and thanks to a host of other things. But is it a panacea? Of course not.
Well, what you described as low artificial intelligence
Right.
is really trial and error of all the possible permutations.
Right.
And so that's why a computer could play checkers before it could play chess, because actually it could play chess if it had 2 days or 2 weeks to respond to make its move.
Right.
And so the computer had to get fast enough to be able to respond at a reasonable time to those permutations. And then the higher order of artificial intelligence introduces
Stronger,
heuristics and so on top of
Right.
the permutations.
Right.
And so it seems to me that, don't you think that the issues of big data being inaccurate will resolve themselves, and that as artificial intelligence develops, there will no longer be a problem with finding the particular face you're looking for in London, because the artificial intelligence with the heuristics and the permutation, the brute speed of the computer with the trial and error will be sufficient to find that person in 2 minutes from 5 years worth of data.
Right. But, and I would agree overall with that statement, but it's very possible that criminals could use the latest technology to change the, somehow without harming their eyes, to change the physical configuration of their iris. I read a fascinating book on counterfeiting a while back. It's been a year or so. I can't remember the name of the book. Obviously, the money that we have now has got all this incredible, it's got metal and it's got all this, incredible technology that's out there, and it's getting better and better. And yet the counterfeiters they're doing a good job of keeping up with it, and they're making amazing strides as well. So the technology for the good, in some of the cases you mentioned, is there. But the technology, look at all the malware that's out there, and look at all the scammers and the people that use their for nefarious purposes are going to have all these cyber crimes and all that. So I think it's really going to be 2 steps forward and 1 3/4 step back in many of these cases. So.
Well, have you heard, there's already been a major oops on algorithm programming of the drones over in Afghanistan.
Oh no, I haven't heard that.
Someone wrote an algorithm because most of the targets of interest they were seeking were taller than the people around them. And the drone ended up taking out a school teacher and her grade school class.
Yeah. Well, just think about, let's say you have an autonomous car, and a child darts out in the road. And so if that computer, that autonomous car, has about 1/10 of a second to respond or less. The other option is to veer into a small carload of people and kills the people. So killing 1 child or killing 4 people in the ongoing car, well, who's going to do the programming on that? There's some huge philosophical questions, and that really hasn't been addressed yet.
Which I would like you to address.
So then that carload of people that could be 4 people in their 80s, and then I would say I wanted to go into the car and kill the 4 people in their 80s rather than the small child. But what if the car has 4 children in it? Then I would want to program it so that it kills that 1 child on the street. But how are you going to program that?
But see, I think you're ignoring the bigger question, and the bigger question is, who does this artificial intelligence programming deliver power to decide to?
Well, who's making these decisions now?
That's what I'm saying. I worked in a corporation where we had whole floors full of programmers.
Yeah.
And one of the nasty little things that programmers tended to do is, for job security or just because they didn't like somebody, they'd write their own little code in there. And it might be date activated or something, so that then they would need to be brought back in to fix it later on.
And them and only them.
Them and only them, and see, this, he was talking about MK Ultra and basically the making of Manchurian candidates. I'm putting this to you for you to comment on the potential of a programmer creating a Manchurian robot.
And how would you characterize a Manchurian robot?
One that would take out someone that programmer was interested in taking out.
Well, I would say that's possible. I tend to believe overall in the goodness of man rather than the badness of man, and I think situations like that would be, I say they would be possible. I think they would be extremely rare. For example, if you had someone that did that introduced malware, and that only he and he alone could fix that, then I think that person would be exposed to law enforcement. I know that if that was my company, that person did that too, I would go after that person with everything I had as far as the law and legal remedies for something like that.
Well, we actually have rolling blackmail going on right now. That we have kind of this rolling epidemic of blackmail. Software blackmail going on where hackers will go in and they will take hostage some medical records even and something else.
That's an excellent point. Yep, you're right.
So is the Turing test outdated as a measure of artificial intelligence?
No, I don't think so. I don't think the Turing test is outdated. I think it's a fascinating, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I think it's a fascinating test developed, the Turing test basically is developed by forgot his first
Alan
name.
Turing.
Alan Turing, a British mathematician 60, 70 years ago. And basically, the Turing test states that if you have a machine, and you're not actually looking at the machine, but the responses from that machine, that computer, are the same in your mind as a human being's responses would be. So it sort of looks and feels and acts like a human being, then is past the Turing test.
Well,
So
to be more direct, it's like
strong
you can
artificial.
communicate with the computer through a teletype machine.
Yeah, yeah.
You can communicate to the human being with. You can communicate with the computer through a teletype machine.
Yeah.
Communicate with a human being
Or
through
email.
another teletype machine.
Yeah.
And you can ask them anything you want. Can you tell which one's the human and which one's the
Right,
computer?
right. Now there's a question an issue that's similar to that brings up something in my mind. There are artificial intelligence programs that
Jan?
okay, there are artificial intelligence programs that are used to write summaries of baseball games. Okay, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. It has the box score. It's input the box score in there, and it writes it has a program, sort of like the Turing test in a way, and it writes a description of what happened in that baseball game. And baseball experts can't tell the difference. So in that sense, that program, that artificial intelligence, has passed the Turing
It's
test.
in that subject matter area.
Exactly.
Okay, one final question here is, I know the talk is 2030.
2037, right.
Okay.
I just have picked a number out. 20 years from now, I mean, it's
Okay.
a lot of things I talked about are occurring today.
And that was my point, is most of our technology, and I'm not saying I support Kurzweil's singularity idea. However, the progress has been logarithmic.
Right.
We are experiencing a geometric growth in information. I don't think you can put it off that long to say the future is going to be only there then. What's your comment?
I don't understand the question.
What if we get there next year?
I don't think it's going to happen next year. I don't think the singularity is going to happen next year. So the first conference for artificial intelligence occurred the year I was born, 1956, in Dartmouth. Now these computer scientists, they said that strong artificial intelligence would be occurring 20 years from now. In other words, in the mid-70s, there would be strong artificial intelligence that would have the type of intelligence that human beings have. Hasn't happened. I don't think it's going to happen in 20 years. I think we're just way too complex. Once again, I go back to what I said before. We're a combination of analog and digital responses and impulses. Computers are just digital. Computers are not biological. We have all these biological components that have been formed over eons of centuries. And I think there has been some artificial intelligence winners that have occurred, and I wouldn't be surprised if that occurs again. So that there's slow progress, and I don't see it happening that fast. I think the human brain is the most complex thing in our universe, in our known universe, and to try and replicate it within 1 year, it's not going to happen.
Good to sit down.
Okay, good.
Okay, now it's your turn to talk, so who wants to be first? Come on up here. You've got 5 minutes to respond what the speaker said, for or against.
I'm in trouble now.
Well, I think it was an excellent presentation. It presented a lot of things that are going on that probably most of us are maybe vaguely aware of. Some of us may be more aware of it. But my point here is that when you look at technology, technology is a tool. And tools are just something that people use. And you know, when I mentioned MK Ultra and the Super Soldier program, you know, I like to dig into things and find out just what really is going on. And this is very interesting stuff. There's a lot of things going on there. But just imagine an evil genius, of which there are many, getting his hands on this technology and starting to speculate on what can I do with this. And mind control is one of the things evil geniuses have worked on. They have developed it. I think the guy's name was Cameron, Edward Cameron or something like that in Canada. He did a lot of mind control experiments on patients in hospitals up there, and the guy was an evil genius. He literally programmed people to think certain ways. And he used torture, and there were a number of people. There was Dr. Green or somebody, I think it might have been Mengele. Actually, Mengele came over here from Germany after World War II, and our government used him. And he did a lot of experimentation on people, and torture was part of that. And there are many survivors of this kind of treatment. And they have some horrific stories to tell. Russ Dizdar wrote a book called The Black Awakening. And if you want to understand some of the things that people are programmed to do, read that book. It's scary. I mean, he talks about people that are programmed to run faster than cars, and they're able to do that. And there's a lot of other things involved too, where the military has had a super soldier program for a long time, and I think they're Russ Dizdar talks about it. I think they're up to 5th generation, where they develop capabilities at all these different levels. And they're literally at the point now where you can't kill these people. You can shoot them and their body heals immediately. You know, stick them with a sword. And even in the Bible, I think the book of Joel, it talks about soldiers that will be pierced with a sword and they won't be wounded. So, I mean, this is very interesting, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. And Ray Kurzweil is probably one of the foremost expert on what we know about. Then there are the things that we don't know about. And mind control and super soldiers are a couple of the things that have been developed for a long time, and they're well into development. And there's a lot of material out there on that if you care to look it up.
Dorothy, we're not in Kansas anymore. One of the things to reflect on here in all this is we have individuals like Kurzweil who really approach this from a 3D atheist approach. And I think someone asked Kurzweil if he believed in God, and he said, "Not yet, but I'm working on it." What did he mean? Some people were saying that he felt he could become God. So, I mean, it's really kind of, this is a playground for evil geniuses. And so I think the debate comes down to what I call individual versus collective. And not collective in the normal sense where everyone is sharing and caring and all that kind of stuff, but a managed collective, managed by fascist infrastructure, with robotic overlords managing the collective. This is what they write about. If you read the white papers of these folks, what they are birthing, if you will, what they're intending. I have this disagreement with some, is I believe that the 7 and whatever billion we have right now, maybe we're not managing things well, but I think the carrying capacity of the Earth is reasonably about 38 billion. And we have so much unused space. all around the globe. And what people ignore, we're kind of in a technological cartel situation because you can pull water right out of the air. It's called humidity. There are ways to do that. There are a number of different ways to harvest electricity. And there have been people who I've listened to recently speaking about the fact we have anti-gravity and we have some other technologies that will never be released until they say we have global government so that no one anywhere in the world would be able to use this technology nefariously. That's a really scary picture too, because then who's managing the managers? And are they going to be Ray Kurzweil philosophy managers? So I think we're at a challenge here with artificial intelligence, a challenge for our humanity. And I think it's an incremental thing. We're fighting an incremental battle, an incremental chess game, if you will, where many little decisions are adding up to what the destiny, what the future will be. And I'm happy I'm not in your shoes, having to make predictions on how things are going to be, because I've kind of lost my crystal ball on how this is all going to work out. I really don't know. So we're in this battle, and the ancient adage was, "Know thyself."
Well, I made some notes that are so scribbled I can hardly read them myself. You mentioned that you thought these issues should be turned over to the higher echelons of the military and so forth. John Kennedy was in a meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they were saying, well, you know, if we had a nuclear war with Russia, there'd be about 20 million people killed on each side, but we'd win. And they wanted that war. And that's what the whole deal on Cuba was. They wanted that war. And John Kennedy got up out of that meeting, walked out and said, you men are insane. And then he went and called Khrushchev and got that war stopped, in essence, and got the missiles out of Cuba. I think that turning over control to government is the most insane thing that humanity does. And our founding fathers knew this in the Constitution they created, which has been somewhat adulterated by putting in the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Reserve System, which are total control and take all the property away from your control systems ever devised, which need to be gotten rid of. Turning over to government the control of humanity, to me, is just insane. That's the end of freedom. And I'm sorry we don't have a small enough population to still have the town hall meetings that rule things, where the people will meet and make decisions for their neighbors and themselves. We can't do that anymore. The city council in Dallas doesn't even listen to one damn thing you say when they allow you 3 minutes every month to come down and talk about a key issue. Same with the county commissioners. I was involved in presenting there once, and that was it. I realized that this government's out of human control. It's in the control of whoever these entities are. As far as healing cancer and things like that, there are numerous cancer cures out there that have been totally stifled by the pharmaceutical and medical industries. These are cartels that do not want the competition. There was a friend of ours one time who was listening, he did a lot of video work, and he was listening to like 2 o'clock in the morning to videos that were appearing on the internet. And this particular one got jerked off the air before the guy finished. He had retired out of a pharmaceutical company, and he was saying that every drug is designed not to cure the disease, but to manage the disease. And every drug by the pharmaceutical companies contains other chemicals. So that if you take that drug over a period of time, you're going to develop another disease and need another chemical that will give you another disease and another. That's why older people are on 5, 10, 15, 20 drugs. This is a totally evil cartel. And they have paid for the government that has not taken antitrust laws and broken them up. And, you know, the people need to wake up and make sure this is done. They had a small enough population, and as we've said here many times, in, what was the little island? Iceland. When they had the banking collapse, thousands of their people got pots and pans and spoons and surrounded all their government buildings and beat on these things by the thousands 24/7 and drove their entire government out, held their own elections, and last I heard they had 27 of their bankers in prison where they belong. As far as intelligence of mankind, I am not impressed. I think mankind, with all of its technology, has created more nightmares than solutions. I think mankind, the present state of development, mankind's use of any form of nuclear radioactive material is virtually insane. Look at Fukushima. Look at Chernobyl. Well, you know, there's probably a 97 percentile safety range on there. Well, it hit the 3%. And now plutonium has like a half-life of 25,000 years. It'll be 1,000,000 years before they can use that land again, unless they come up with a way to take the radioactivity out of the material, which looks like a long shot off. Am I driving you out?
No, I just get some water.
Let's see. A lot of diseases I don't think are genetic. Families have habits. They have the same chemicals in their houses. They eat the same foods. They have this wonderful American diet that leads to all kinds of diseases. There are cancer cures. There are cures. I have a book from a lady who had a terrible case of MS, and she just, by God, wasn't going to accept it. And she went through a lot for some years and completely cured her MS, which is supposed to be incurable. There was a group of scientists for the Navy, I've mentioned this before, who were studying dolphins, trying to train them to do military duties, probably plant a bomb on a ship. They shut down the experiment because they were just astounded to realize, without a doubt, that the dolphins are more intelligent than human beings. They don't have arms and legs, so they can't get on the land and carry out things we do, but they're more intelligent. They've got a whole lot bigger brain capacity. As far as surveillance and so forth, I would, again, recommend everybody go to the website surveillanceissues.com and also look up Barry Trower, Trower. They have satellites in orbit right now with computers so fast that with the satellites and the computers that they have, they can monitor every human being on Earth simultaneously, because they know that every human being in their setup has a discrete fingerprint electronic communication ID, and only they can hear on that frequency pattern. And they know this, and they're manipulating people. They have cataloged by electrodes the formation electronically of over 68,000 words in many different languages, and they can program words into your mind and probably feelings in your mind. A friend of mine worked at TI in the mid-'80s, and they were making implants back then, and he said, boy, I was thinking about that one day. With just a little bit more circuitry, they could push a button and kill the guy with the implant, just like that. I think, given the moral and spiritual state of humanity today, where greed and lust for power is ruling over love for your fellow man, technology is a huge danger.
Well, I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in philosophy. But at the time that I was coming along, there was no such thing as a degree in computer science for someone who wanted to be a business programmer. It was all oriented towards research. So while I was in graduate school, I taught myself to program in Fortran, and the first project that I worked on was with the Yerkes Primate Institute. And you might be familiar with the Lana project where they were teaching chimpanzees language. Well, I wrote the software that ran the operant conditioning boxes that gave the stimulus to the chimpanzee, recorded the response, and then gave a reward or not. And if you think about it for a moment, that's actually an early form of artificial intelligence, the use of artificial intelligence, because if it weren't for the computer doing that, you'd have had to have a person sitting there, provide, that's what they did before, provide the stimulation, and then make a decision about whether to provide the reward or not. And so that was done in Fortran on an Interdata mini computer. Now, this mini computer, if you took two of these tables and stacked them on top of each other, that was about the size of that computer, which was a huge reduction in size, because by that point, we went from vacuum tubes to transistorized computers with the IBM 70 series, the 7094 was one, to integrated circuits. And integrated circuits being invented by someone right here in Dallas at TI. You know, to give you another example, I, like Ron Kirk, actually had a job at one point selling TI data math calculators. And a TI data math calculator was about this big, and what it did is it did addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. It had a percent key. It had no memory in it. Okay, sold for $130. Within 2 years, that thing was being busted out the door at $5, because within 2 years of that calculator coming out, they had credit card size calculators. So that just gives you an idea of how this technology has advanced. Now, I believe, and I'd be curious to hear your comment on this, I believe that at the moment, the speed of the computers, the processing power of the computers actually outstrips our ability to program them, even if it's using heuristics. And so what I think is that while the computers are getting faster and faster, we are behind in our ability to program them and take real advantage of the speed and power that they actually offer.
I've not read that. I don't know if I buy that the programmers are not able to keep up with the hardware improvements.
Mm-hmm.
Though I'm not an expert in that particular area, but I've not read that.
And the real question, you're going to get back up here and respond to us. This is the question I wanted to ask you. It occurs to me that as these computers are used in medicine for diagnostics and so on, and our AI gets stronger and stronger, I wonder how effective artificial intelligence computers and with diagnostic tools and so on might be in unlocking the power of the human brain, because as said, we only use very small parts of the brain. So it may be that that one of the results of this computer advance, and it actually helps us to unlock the power of our own brains and become much more intelligent ourselves without necessarily being assisted by devices being implanted. Thank you.
Well, I think that we've been living under, the Damocles sword ever since 1945, when the first atomic bomb was dropped. And so we've been living under this possibility of total wipeout. And so this problem is not new. It just shows you what we go on being more and more clever until the point where we can wipe each other out totally. And so this problem is not new, in fact. And the question now is, will this artificial intelligence get so smart it will outsmart us? Given the degree of greed, which is one thing, and then the total stupidity of most of our leaders, which is astounding, it won't be surprising that these machines will outsmart us. Really, it won't take much, because we've seen some really ridiculous things go on, especially over the last 35 years. I've always advocated economic democracy because I do think that there is a reservoir of common sense amongst the average ordinary person that is an unrealized asset. I mean, basically, I think the normal average person really does have common sense. They're not driven by this power lust, greed lust, which seems to make these top people totally dim, and they are most of the time. They will do things that are completely unthinkable. I mean, this whole wholesale of America giving technology to China is beyond my understanding of how it happened, why it happened. But the people who did this, starting with Nixon, are completely dim. And it's gone on ever since, to the point where I think Americans, and in England too, have grown concerned about globalization. Of course, the leaders of China are all for it, since they benefit so much. And so I think this is, the concerns you raise are in fact a very interesting talk, because I mean, I was a PhD technologist and so on. I got more into the economics and finance scheme of things. But so socioeconomics is very interesting to me. But unless we can have some better mechanism of everybody having a say, which is what I talked about, economic democracy, I do think we're going to be let clean off the tracks by these people who are very dangerous. We see in America there are 5 major communications corporations, that Disney and so on and so forth, that really control what we think and believe. I mean, it's all very well Trump running around saying everything's a lie. Well, we just do not know what's going on, and it's the country we live in, and we should be part and parcel of it. I mean, as Albert said, even down at the town hall level, they sort of ignore the general will of things. And I think I've said in my talks, the first law I would pass is the law of protection of democracy. I mean, these people are our servants, and yet they act as our bosses. And they do things that are totally counterproductive to our interest and the country's interest, and they get away with it. And so the first law of any constitution should be, you do this, you act as your overlords. I mean, 2,000 years ago, or actually, I'm sorry, 1,000 years ago, when William the Conqueror came and was a boss and owned everything, we went way past that. But we're going back to that now. I think about 5 people are going to own half the world in a few years. I mean, it's absurd what's going on. Absurd. I mean, we can do so much with our resources, and yet it's been totally warped out of sight. Now when they get control of robots, because they will own the robots, right? And so there will be more and more people, there are the surplus population thrown on the scrap heap as being worthless, because they're not needed. And so that's another reason for concern, because what will happen, there will be a revolution. And in this country, with everybody armed to the teeth, it's going to be a violent revolution, and it's going to be a disaster if it all happens. And so the only answer really is the actual common sense of the people, actually, if you could get to such a thing, expressing itself. Now, in the election in England, you had a remarkable result of the population just getting up, and we've had enough of this austerity nonsense. And the leader was just, who thought she was so wonderful, was going to march forward, it's gone. Because the parliamentary system acts so fast. You're not tied to some complete nitwit for 5 years, you know, you can get rid of them in a week. You know, that's why I recommend a parliamentary system here. It works, it works. And in fact, as I said before, American system was the system in England 300 years ago. Exactly the same system, we got rid of it. We don't have kings anymore and their cabinets. You can't get rid of them, no more. So that's the challenge, really. We do have all these problems hanging over us, global warming, running out of raw materials, and so on and so forth. It's really the common sense of people somehow harnessed in a democracy that believes in diplomacy rather than going around killing everything and everyone, and using the force of arms to force this, that, and the other. It never works. But technology will continue, and there's no question. The question is, how can we control it? Will it work for us or will it kill us? And that's been around, as I say, since 1945. That's a serious question that we need a serious answer. And we need serious politicians. And looking around, I don't see many serious. I see idiots, simpletons. I don't really see someone you can respect, actually. I don't see it. They don't have the proper education in anything very much. I hate to say it, Albert, but many of them are lawyers. And, you know,
Well, I know that.
you know, I just don't respect these people. I just don't, you know.
I ran into a lot of
I know, so, you know, and as I've said about the Federal Reserve, we need a system to control the fiscal system and the monetary system together because they work together, but we don't have that. And as you said, it's a private bank, Federal Reserve, controlled by the money interests. I mean, it spreads around the world and it's a cancer. I mean, really, we're in a democratic deficit. And we have these tremendous problems hanging over us. And I think many populations are just really fed up with their leadership. I mean, they hate Washington. And there are no good mechanisms of getting good people with common sense, well-trained. I mean, we don't have, in France they have this political, economic college where people go and get trained to be proper bureaucrats, and so they can run things properly. You know, we've seen people who walk off the street and they're running us the next second. I mean, they're totally without education. There's no test for these people, you know. There's certainly no intelligence test. They appear to have great qualities of charisma and lying and cheating and everything else, but not much, you know. Anyway, that's one of the fundamental questions. How do we get good leaders? How do we get people we can believe in, have integrity, and so on? And these are the qualities that are needed, and we just don't see it.
Darn, I think my foot went to sleep while I was sitting there too long. Well, we really enjoyed the presentation tonight.
Jim, could I make one more real quick comment?
Of course. Like,
I'll need to occupy the place where you are.
back up here.
Yes, just real quick.
This instant.
This instant.
Both of you.
Shall we do a duet?
Maybe so.
That'll be good.
I used to own one of those data math calculators, and this was probably 15, 20 years ago. At that time, it was an antique, and it was worth $1,500. Got stolen, of course. Also, there was a man in Army intelligence, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, and he was in the Pentagon in the 50s and 60s and so forth. And one day, General Trudeau, his commanding officer, came to him and said, "Follow me." Took him down to another floor and handed him a key and said, "This is the only key to that room, which is the Army." It contained the Army's meager portion of debris of the Roswell crash of the flying saucer. And his job was to pick up this object and say, "What the heck is that? Is that material science or electronics or what is that? And when he'd get that part figured out, he'd look around in the great research institutes, Bell Labs and so forth, and he'd find a guy who would be the guy to take that to, and he'd put on civilian clothes and put it in his pocket and go meet him, take him to lunch. And if he felt confident with him, he'd have him sign the security oath. He'd give him that part. And he seeded into our industry in those years 38 different items, including integrated circuits. The guy at TI did not invent it. He took credit for it to cover the fact that it came off that flying saucer that crashed in Roswell. Lieutenant Colonel Corso was on coast to coast being interviewed for 3 hours one night. And David Oates, who discovered reverse speech analysis, analyzed the whole thing and said that everything he said, his reverse speech items backs up everything. From the years that he's been in that, he knows that the subconscious cannot and will not lie or deceive. If you're telling a lie, it'll be telling the truth. To give you an example, he was asked, he was in Saxe for a few years, that's how I met him. He was asked one time to analyze the testimony of a man on trial in a divorce suit. And the guy was on the stand saying, well, Your Honor, this property sheet lists everything that we've got. There's just nothing else to divide up. Well, David did a reverse analysis on that. And in the reversals came out the names of 3 Texas counties. And the lawyers went to the deed records in those counties, and in each one of those counties found real estate he was lying about and hiding. It is absolutely accurate, and he totally verified everything that Corso said. So it's very interesting. There's a whole lot more to science. We advanced 1,000 years in the 50s and 60s and 70s, far beyond what is normal because of back engineering. And that's still going on. We've got a space effort that's got us onto every planet in the solar system and nearby stars. And this was virtually stated by a fellow who retired as the director of the Skunk Works at Lockheed Aircraft, where they develop all these top secret things. In a speech that he gave to a college after he had retired, he said that we have the technology today to fly to the stars, but he thought it would take an act of God to get it released to the benefit of the public. That's your leaders.
Thank you, John. I will be brief. I think one of my observations has been like our speaker showed us tonight, and many of us have shown through comments we made. We've done some tremendous advancements in our technology. But to me, when I back off of it and look at it from a distance, some of it's also frightening. Because when you look at what human behavior is like, the more capable we become in our technology, the more damaging a person can be. You know, just think, in most of our lifetimes, we're old enough here that we were alive and breathing when the 2 bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What if the Germans had stayed in control long enough, they put those together, and they dropped one on New York City and the other on LA? Think what our world would be like. Just a little twist. So, while technological advance is wonderful, I love it. I can do things now that I only daydreamed about doing a few years ago. And then when it became available, I had to let someone else do it and bring me the results. And now I can sit there on that laptop I brought in for him to use and do things that a whole room full of computers in our company would not do just a few years ago in my work lifespan. So my point is this: I want us to keep advancing But I think in a group like this, we have something that's, I guess I would call it positive bias. And that is, we've come to know one another well enough. We're a pretty squeaky clean group of people from most standards. And if we went out and handed that knowledge to everyone in this room, I think most of us could go home tonight and go to sleep and not worry about, will we wake up in the morning or will the world be gone? And so that's sort of dangerous in a way. If you go out, you know, I always like to relate back to when Jay Leno was still on television. And he'd go out, of course he could screen out things that were not attractive to put on the tube. But when he would go out and he would interview people on the street, and you saw how ignorant people were, and if he could see they were not just a dirty, poorly dressed street person, he usually asked them about their education. A lot of them were in the second degree of their master's program, or they were in their senior year in a 4-year college degree. He'd ask them very simple questions. I would not have even blinked an eye to answer when I was 10 years old, going to public schools in Dallas. And they would either give an answer that was off the wall, you know, it was good humor, you laughed at it, or they would say, gee, I don't know. So computers can do some fantastic things. Technology, not just inside computers, can do some fantastic things, but you have people involved in them. I'll just give you, here's one short comment in that regard. Think about the fellow who is now residing over in Russia, who released a bunch of information out of a government computer. As is the case almost every time, he was not an employee of the federal government, he was a contractor. People inside the government can't, we may all really know this and think this, they can't do a lot of things that need to be done. That's just like a lot of people can't work on their plumbing or their electricity or other things just inside their own house. You know, you call a professional out to do that. Well, the government does the same thing. Well, if you get a room full of 47 computer analyst, programmer, whatever, scientific people of one sort or another, are they all going to be squeaky clean, quote, Sunday school teachers? No. A lot of them are going to sit there very nice, and at some point, they're going to disappear somewhere and take what they've learned, and they may do it in a very negative way. It's risky. That's the risk of living on the earth. Here's sort of to me, it's sort of eerie. No evidence of any technology in place. But here's a simple example that has now replayed enough times that I sort of scratch my head. Okay, a family leaves a Middle Eastern country and they move to the United States or to England or some other Western democratic-oriented country. And they stay squeaky clean, right? Guess who goes bad? Invariably the son. Occasionally it's the daughter. But almost always that son has gone for a period of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year down to one of the Middle Eastern countries for, quote, training. And they've grown up, and people know them, and they describe their personality, their behavior, their attitudes. And they come back, and they'll display that outwardly, but inside is an insidious program that's been installed in their thinking that incites them to go commit suicidal murder. How in the world do they do that without hooking them, it's not like going to a science fiction movie where they hook the electrodes into the brain of the person and go bzzz, and all of a sudden they come out a different person. These guys are doing it in very simplistic third world countries. Well, if they can do that without all of the sophisticated tools like our speaker has described to us tonight, and many of us have espoused on, what in the world do you think a sophisticated program could do with just one or two or three bad guys in the gang? Kind of makes you think, don't it?
I think I'm the last one standing, so I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job here tonight. You guys all thank you. I got thinking about one of the things that John brought up earlier was our government, where we're going, how we're going to get there, and how technology fits into all of this. In the Industrial Revolution, they replaced many people with machines. Machines didn't pay taxes, and it took years to straighten that out. I came from the railroad industry. In 1913, they passed the Adamson Law. It was established an 8-hour day in the railroad industry and a 7-day work week at the time. But there was no 8-hour day prior to that time. People worked from dawn till dusk, and that's how it was done. In 1938, they passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. They reduced the work week from 10 hours to 8 hours. And they reduced the work week from 60 hours to 40 hours, the work day from 10 hours to 8 hours. They didn't cut the pay. They got the same take-home pay in 8 hours they used to make in 10. Well, maybe it's time to do the same thing, because we got 25 million people today that are either unemployed or underemployed. That's part of our problem. And so if we shorten the workday, we might re-employ them. We might have a 6-hour day instead of an 8-hour day. We'd have more time to watch our kids when we're not there. We'd have more people working, paying taxes, less people not working, draining taxes. The government would get a twofold benefit of increased tax revenue without raising taxes. So we'd have less bills to pay for people who aren't working because they'd be working. And we'd have a better society. We'd have everybody working. The economy would take off. But this country can't, if we put that in place, the corporations all leave town and go overseas where labor costs are cheaper, because that's one of our problems also. So we got to get the corporations to stay here. That's one of the things that we have to work on. And then we have another problem, even worse than that, so we get the best Congress money can buy. To get them to do anything if it's against the corporations is bad. Corporations control the government, and by definition, that's fascism. Corporations controlling government. That's where we're at. And it's not a good thing. So we got to get Congress to do something. What will they do? In my view, they'll vote for free airtime the last 90 days of a general election, because they get to keep the money they raise, plus they get free airtime. And they have no history of a challenger being an incumbent, because it hasn't happened since before the year 2000. So if they were to put that in effect, then they'd vote for that, and they'd end up with people what would happen is some challengers would beat some incumbents, and then everybody the Congress would represent the people instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington. Then you can put tariffs on corporations overseas, because you put tariffs on other countries that are going to work. Put a tariff on Mexico, they're going to put tariff on you. You're going to be worse off than you were. So you put a tariff on Apple, they produce everything in China. They don't produce anything here. There's no jobs here. So where's the problem? Well, the problem is where's the application is that they pay for the difference in labor costs, the difference in environmental protections, the difference in transportation costs, and maybe the difference in taxes, which is quite substantial. And if they paid that, then they don't want to pay that. Fine, produce it here. Then you'd have jobs here. And if every country in the world produced what it could in its own country, it'd be far better off than shipping stuff all over the world to go where labor costs are cheaper. That's the big problem we have. That's why our labor forces and everybody else are suffering today, because they can't get ahead. They have no negotiating strength because corporations leave town. Anyway, I applaud your idea of implementation of what we're doing today. It's a good thing, and it's been going on since the beginning of time. if we went to a shorter workday, we wouldn't gain 2 hours. We'd get back what we lost in traffic. So that's basically what I have to say about what you had to say. So thank you. We get to comment on a comment and close this meeting.
Okay. Well, first up, I want to thank everyone and thank Tom and others for inviting me. It's been very enlightening, and I always enjoy hearing different perspectives on this issue. I will say that some of the things I've heard today struck me as being sort of absolute and as if there is 1 or 2 or 3 solutions to solve a problem, and that the problem is due to this, or the problem is due to that, and that there are fairly simple problems or simple solutions. I don't buy it. I look at the problems of our society, of which there are many, and I see them as complex and multifaceted, and I see them as ones where we have to look at a host of avenues to consider to make them, to improve them. I don't buy the idea that all politicians are bad or are dense. I don't buy the argument that there's a man that can run faster than a car. I don't buy the argument that there is that technology is inherently evil. It can be. There can be problems with technology, and many of you have very eloquently pointed out some of those problems. But I will go back to one of my favorite books by Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Our Nature, I believe. And in that book, he talks about how violence in the world is down, and based it and backs it up with a tremendous amount of statistical data. That there has not been a major war between 2 major powers since Korea, the longest time in history, recorded history of mankind. Worldwide statistics on rape are down, on murder are down, poverty is down. I just got back from India, poverty is down from India. And I think technology can play a role there. But as I pointed out, and as many of you very well pointed out, there are many problems with technology. It's not a panacea. But I would proffer that the pros outweigh the cons, and I would make the point that whenever you hear someone say that this problem is due to such and such, it's due to these stupid people or those stupid people or this dense person or whatever, for you to engage your critical thinking skills as much as you possibly can, and for you to say, well, this is a complex issue, we have to look at it from a variety of angles, and that there's no simple cause to problem A in this society or problem B in this society. It's multifaceted, and it's important to look at these issues in a contemplative way, in a non-passionate way, in an analytical way, and think, how we as individuals and how technology and how all these other facets of our world can make it better. Thank you for your time.
Well, that's it for tonight, so, our speaker, they kick us out of here at 10:30,
Yeah.
so you're willing to stick around and say hello to everybody, and
I would
whatever
like
they
to
want
do
to ask
that.
you, that's fine, our formal meeting is over.
Great. Okay.